Old
Go ahead.
Woman by Nishan, Maddie, Derby, and Najwa. Next slide, please. So our author was Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. Mary E. Wilkins was a prominent 19th century American author. She was born in October 31st in 1852 in Massachusetts. She was born in a really religious family, bestowing a very strict childhood. She went on to finish her high school in Vermont, but moved back to Massachusetts for college. Um, Her mom would pass away in 1876 because of depression, and then her dad would also pass away in 1882, basically leaving her broke and jobless. Um, she would go on to move in with her friends Mary Wales and immediately start her writing career at this time after her parents had passed away. She would meet her future husband, who is a doctor, in 1892 and get married to him 10 years later after a 10-year of courtships. The newly couple settled in a small town and they became a celebrity because of Mary's writing. After after Mary's mother had passed away, she had started writing to support her family financially. Mm, Her husband at the time, he was a doctor, but he wasn't practicing medicine, so he would turn into an alcoholic and become addicted to sleeping powder. They would get a divorce a year later, and he would later die in 1923. The reason for the divorce was because he had to be admitted to a mental hospital because of alcoholism. He basically left all of his wealth after he died to his chauffeur, and Mary was only left with $1, and he did that on purpose. Mary would die of a heart attack in 1926, aged 77, having no children. So some of her literary contributions was she was the first recipient for the William Dean Howell Medal for distinction in fiction from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Through her writing, she helped advance the feminist cause by creating strong female leads in her stories that weren't dependent upon men for assistance. Her career as a short story writer launched in 1881 when she took first place in a short story contest with her submission of The Ghost Family. Her best works were written in the 1880s. Some of them are A Humble Romance and Other Stories in 1887, and A New England Nun and Other Stories in 1891. So the biographical lens. Wilkins' stories often depicted lives of women in New England. The female character in her stories often showed courage and strength while dealing with conflict with men's. The short story Old Woman highlights the strength and courage that Magoun, the old grandma, had when she was able to elbow herself into conversation of the men's of the town of Berryford to insist them to build um, a bridge that would help them connect to their neighboring town. Even though the bridge was built poorly, she was able to force the men into building it with a strong personality. Wilkins also had a strong personality. She had to survive by herself when her parents had died. She was left broke, so she had to make a living from her writing. And even after her marriage, it was life wasn't easy for her. She had to take charge of the household because even though her husband was a doctor, he wasn't practicing medicine. So she was basically getting the income in the family by her short stories. Wilkins' parents were really protective of her. She was born in a strict religious family, religious and Congregationalist family. She was expected to do all of the household chores to help her mother run the family. Magoon, the old grandma in the story, was also known for her overprotectiveness and her strict upbringing. Magoon wouldn't even let Lily go to the store or anywhere else without her knowing. She really wanted to keep an eye on Lily, and so she basically made her stay inside. While Wilkins rebelled against her parents, not doing any of the household chores, her parents would discipline her, and even that would not change Wilkins' mind. Wilkins would be found reading books more than doing household chores, and she had her sister at that time, and you could really tell the difference, how opposite they were. While her little sister would be doing household chores, Wilkins would be found in the library reading books. The story of Old Woman was rather different because Lily didn't go against her grandma, but Lily was also younger than Wilkins at that time, so she really didn't have the chance to rebel or anything like that. Lily didn't. The only way she might have rebelled was by talking to Sally Jenks or her father, since they were both basically strangers to her. And old woman Magoon had told Lily to not talk to strangers and just go to the stores and get the stuff that she needs and come back. So my questions for biographical lens was, if Lily was still alive, do you think that she would have rebelled against her grandma like Wilkins had done with her mom?
Probably not. She was extremely innocent and sheltered, and even said in the story that she seemed way younger than she actually was because she didn't know what was up. She didn't even know to rebel against her grandma.
Yeah, I do see your point. That she it did mention that she did look younger than she actually was. So I do definitely agree with that. My second question was, do you think the story could have been about um, the author Wilkins, like something she experienced about it?
I think there are definitely parts from each character that are like Wilkins. And I think that she definitely saw herself in Lily. And I think that that influenced how she wrote the old woman's decisions and how she portrayed Lily throughout the story.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with that because maybe the whole story wasn't about her, about something that she experienced, but there were definitely parts of the stories where you can find similarities between the author and Lily.
Archetypal lens. Mary E. Wilkins created Old Woman Magoun, a story that has many parallels to ancient stories, specifically fairy tales. The story of the old woman and her daughter has many similarities to fairy tales we have all been familiar with since we were children. This includes Cinderella, Snow White, Rapunzel, and many more. These similarities are drawn from the relationship between the old woman and her granddaughter Lily. Like Cinderella's fairy godmothers, she helps her after her mother dies by taking her in and caring for her like she did her own daughter. Her authority then seems to become excessive as Lily is getting older and is almost 14 years old and has never been able to run with the other children of Barry's Ford. Her grandmother taught her everything she knew, which was not much, but tending at least to a certain measure of spiritual growth, for she, as it were, poured the goodness of her own soul into this little receptive vase of another. This creates a similarity to Rapunzel, where Mother Gothel locks Rapunzel away from the outside world, leaving her with only the knowledge that was taught to her by this mother figure. Old Woman Magoon's determination to keep Lily innocent and childlike with her doll and the way she dresses and ultimately locked away is what eventually led to Lily's death. After hearing Nelson Barry's plans to get back Lily for his own benefit, Old Magoon makes the decision that since the lawyer wouldn't adopt her, the best thing to do to keep Lily innocent is to let her eat the poisonous berries that caused her death, which in Snow White's case was a poisonous apple. In this story, Lily is the innocent young princess who is seen as needing saving from the world, whose grandmother can be seen either as a fairy godmother by taking her in and loving her the way she did, Lily's mother, or an evil mother who would rather have Lily die by allowing her to eat the berry she knew would harm her than let Nelson Berry take her or her innocence being taken away. And the archetypal questions were, do you see Old Woman Magoun as a fairy godmother or an evil mother by her actions toward Lily?
I feel like it's almost it's like I feel like she's more fairy godmother than evil mother, but it's like some kind of like twisted, more realistic kind of fairy godmother, like a more gritty one instead of like everything's great and happy and magical, because she went to great lengths to keep her from experiencing anything bad, but she did it in a way that is kind of questionable.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like she really did like love her like very much, but I felt like that came at like the expense of like Lily not, being like the other children and not being able to experience anything because, she was almost 14, but like, she wasn't able to live her life the way like the average 14-year-old would, which makes her seem like not the best, but like at the same time that's all her grandmother wanted for her was the best. And then the other question was, do you think Old Woman Magoun had Lily's best interest at heart as her caretaker?
I think she definitely did. I mean, she saw what happened to her daughter with Nelson Berry, and she didn't want that for her granddaughter. And I think she probably knew that her daughter wouldn't want that for her granddaughter. And so she did the only thing she could think of after she couldn't adopt her. And, no matter how sad it is and how, I mean, obviously Old Woman Magoun was really disappointed, really upset about the death of Lily, but it's what she really thought she had to do.
Yeah, I agree. Because, like, I feel like she had already in her mind knew, like, if Lawyer Mason wasn't able to take her and adopt Lily, then, like, her only other solution was to, let Lily die. Because, like, on the way to Lawyer Mason, she was like, when Lily wanted to stop and like, eat some of the berries, she was like, oh, don't eat those now. Like instead she could have been like, oh, like those are poisonous, like you shouldn't eat those. But instead she was like, oh no, not now. And then, when she found out like he wouldn't adopt her and they came back, she was just like, just standing by and seeing these like Lily eating them. And she's like, okay. Like, she doesn't say anything. So I feel like she like in her mind was like knew that this was like the only option available to her. So I think she did have her best interest, but like felt like there was no other solutions.
Psychological lens. Wilkins Freeman wrote Old Woman Magoun during her marriage to Charles Freeman, a marriage in which she was very unhappy. And Freeman's disdain for men and the institution of marriage are evident throughout the story as we see her viewpoints reflected in the actions of Old Woman Magoun. Old Woman Magoun lets Lily die when she knows Lily cannot be saved from Jim Willis or her father. And Old Woman Magoun's fear of losing Lily, specifically Lily's innocence, stems from the author's feelings that she lost herself once she married her husband. And the story says, the girl is a beauty and almost a woman grown, although you try to make out that she is a baby. You can't live forever. All the same, I'm going to have her, and I tell you it is for her best good. Jim Willis saw her this afternoon, and Old Woman Magoun looked at him. Jim Willis, she fairly shrieked. Well, what of it? One of them Willises? Repeated the old woman, and this time her voice was thick. It seemed almost as if she were stricken with paralysis. She did not enunciate clearly. And here we see that Wilkins Freeman's point of view expressed through the reaction of Old Woman Magoun. She was so upset about Lily losing her innocence once she would have had to get married, that she was just unable to speak. And at that point, she made the decision that Lily had to be saved somehow. And that ultimately led to Lily dying. Old Woman Magoun's interactions with Lily immediately prior to her death, when she suggests that she's going to a much better place, shows that the author is writing Old Woman Magoun as the person in the right. And so she includes personal details about dolls to show that they have a really loving and close relationship. And the story says, and all the dolls are alive, said Old Woman Magoun. Dolls like yours can run and talk and love you back again. Their caring relationship is also shown in the final paragraph when the author shows that Old Woman Magoun still holds on to Lily and the sign of her innocence, her doll, after her death. And this is extremely reflective of Wilkin Freeman's state of mind when writing the story. She felt that marriage, especially those similar to her own, corrupted innocence. And it's possible that deep down, she wished that someone had saved her from her marriage in a way that Old Woman Magoun did for Lily. It says that since every time she went over the bridge with her eggs or her garden vegetables to sell in Greenham, she carried with her, as one might have carried an infant, Lily's old rag doll. And then Old Woman Magoun was written in such a way that expressed how Wilkins Freeman saw herself in society. Old Woman Magoun is a very powerful woman in her town, but she's still a woman, and she does have influence over the men in her town. However, ultimately, the power is still limited, and she can't adopt Lily because of the influence and power that Nelson Berry has in the town. And this is a direct reflection of how Wilkins Freeman felt she was placed in society. She had power and was really respected for her writing, especially among other women, but ultimately she didn't have any power over her husband, and she had to wait until he was institutionalized to be able to separate from him. And even in death, he possessed influence over her when he left her only $1. And then my first question is, do you think Freeman saw herself more so in Lily or in Old Woman Magoun?
I think she saw herself as both, in like the way, like, I felt like as a child, like her experience as a child, she saw herself in like Lily as the way, like, you know, she didn't know much, so she was just blindly following everything that her grandmother told her, except for in her own experience, you know, she rebelled and Lily didn't. But then I also feel like she saw herself in Old Woman Magoun because, you know, like as you said, the way she wrote it made Old Woman Magoun like, oh, like this is her only like option. So I felt like she saw herself as like she would do what Old Woman Magoun would like did to Lily.
Yeah, because there's that first innocence in Lily that when she was young, you know, following her family, but then there's that her older self in Old Woman Magoun, and that like she's very jaded by like men, and she's like she understands that a lot of like relationships can go really bad, or that men can be awful and so forth, and that kind of discontent with her marriage and all that kind of transferred over to Old Woman Magoun.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think she's definitely in both. And, you know, she kind of wishes that she can be like Old Woman Magoun, and she also wishes that someone was like Old Woman Magoun for her. And then the second question is, if the story had been written prior to Freeman's marriage, how would Old Woman Magoun have been depicted differently?
I think she'd be depicted differently. I feel like she wouldn't be as like more of like, you know, like the hero figure as like, oh, she's doing like everything like she can for like she's saving Lily. I feel like it would be more like she's like holding her back. Like I feel like it would be like she'd be depicted as more as like the villain, like holding Lily back, not finding like another solution. But I feel like since she wishes herself someone would save her from the marriage, it like helped her like grow and like realize that she needed someone like that to like help her, and like, you know, realize that sometimes there only is one solution to an issue, and it might not be the best solution, but it is the only solution.
Yeah, because, like, after her marriage, that, like, whole men thing was, like, for her. And so that kind of made her, it was easy to write Old Magoon that way. But if it was before the marriage, or even, like, just after she had met um, the dude, it probably would have been more like, why are you holding me back from having some kind of relationship? Because she would have had to marry that guy for a reason at first, and there's probably still some level of innocence that, oh, I can be in love and have a good guy and maybe things will work out, but it didn't. But she didn't know that at the time, and Owen Magoon would have been like an obstacle to that.
Right. And at the end of the day, like a kid died. And I think that just like the way that it's written, it's just like Old Magoon is the protagonist. And, you know, I understand why she did what she did, but I think that um, Freeman's experiences definitely changed how Old Woman Magoon was written.
Yeah, you have to go through a lot to make a kid die and make it seem like a good thing. So the gender lens, right at the beginning of the story, we see an unusual reversal of the usual gender stereotypes. Instead of seeing a man talking down to women because of their genders and being um, condescending, we see Oda Magoon bash some men. In the story, it says, "If I were a man," said she, "I'd go out this very minute and lay the fuss log. If I were a passel of lazy men laying around, I'd start up for once in my life, I would." She's the one who makes a point about her being female and thus not suitable for hard work instead of a man doing so, and then insults the men for not doing their work. In the very next paragraph, we see the way of things in this town. The weakness of the masculine element in Barry's sword was laid low before such strenuous feminine assertion. It's the exact opposite of how gender roles usually play out in stories, especially older ones like this one. She then goes on to insult the men for only being able to work with drinks and such, while she never needed any such thing. Sally Jinks sums it up. Men is different. However, there is still some elements of one being treated as property. More specifically, Nelson Berry has designs on using his own daughter to pay off his gambling debts. He seems to have little qualms about selling off his young daughter for his own good. Besides that, he treats his sister like a servant, hardly sparing any care for her, especially when she's not exactly bright, and thus would need any help she can get. Jim Lewis, by association, seems perfectly fine with taking a 13-year-old girl as payment, and both of them, Barry and Willis, hardly even have a care when Lily dies. Towards the end of the story, in the second to last page, it says, "There's no use going for the doctor. She'd be dead before he got here," said Nelson, and he stood regarding the passing child with a strange, sad face, unutterably sad because of his incapability of the truest sadness. "Poor little thing, she's past suffering anyhow," said the other man. His own face also was sad with a puzzled, mystified sadness. They don't even express true sadness for her, even showing a bit of psychopathy. Like, even if it wasn't Barry's own daughter, they don't even seem to care properly. Yeah. My first question is, do you think Oda Magoon did the right thing with her choice to let Lily die so she wouldn't be sold off?
I think it's hard to say whether is the right thing because I mean both options suck. You know, like either way, a girl is gonna lose her innocence to this old dude, or she's gonna die. And I think that the biggest thing that is the most significant thing in trying to decide if it was the right thing is realizing that Old Woman Magoon saw the same thing happen with her daughter, and so I think she regrets not saving her daughter from that. And I think in that sense, it is the right thing if you look at it from that lens. But it's hard to say that killing a kid is the right thing, you know?
Yeah, and going off what Maddie said, I feel like she doesn't want history to like repeat itself because as like Lily's mother, eventually she went through that path where she lost her like innocence and everything. And I feel like, and she eventually died. So I feel like um, old woman Magoun just wanted to like prevent like all the like bad things that happened to Lily's mother from happening before she died. So she's like, oh, like might as well, you know, not let her go through that.
Yeah, and it's relatively implied that Magoun might have had a hand in her mom dying, so it's not like she didn't have experience with it. Like she did it once to possibly to let her daughter get away from all that. So I guess just seeing the possibility that her granddaughter would go through it as well, she was just like, okay, let's just do it the first thing, get some berries. But yeah, either way, it's still awful. And second question, do you think Lily would have been okay if she was taken and not like totally screwed up or something?
I definitely don't think she would have been okay, like in anywhere if she was taken, because it they did say that her dad did have the intention of giving her away, basically forcing her to marry Sally Jenks because he owed him gambling debts basically, and so I don't think she would have definitely been okay, but I still don't know if killing Lily was the right thing to do.
I think due to the fact that she was so innocent and she didn't know so much about the outside world, if she was taken away, like at first it would be like all new to her. So she'd be like, oh, is this like really how things are? So I feel like she'd still be like ignorant to how things like really work in the real world because she wasn't really taught that. So I feel like at first she'd be like fine, but then eventually she would learn more and be like, this is not right. Like, this is not okay. And then she would come to like, a realization that like this is not what she wants and that she just wished like it never happened in the first place. And I feel like she would eventually have wanted like someone like her grandmother to be like not let it happen, like the author, how she says she wished like someone like stepped in for her marriage and told her like, hey, like you need to come up with a solution. I feel like she would be like in the author's position if she was taken.
Yeah, if I see it as like if her innocence was able to be kept all this time and avoid the situation and avoid dying, then that would be nice. But if she was gonna end up in that situation anyway, I wish she didn't have that innocence because at least then she would have some strength and ability to kind of withstand it instead of being like, oh my gosh, what's happening? We're good, by the way.